Pay attention. This isn't a debate in Washington anymore. It's a bill showing up at the grocery checkout, on the price tag at the clothing store, and in the sticker price of a new car. Tariffs are no longer an abstract policy line item. They're a hidden tax that gets folded into everything we buy. Quick snapshot. A tariff is simply a tax on goods brought into the country. When the government puts a tax on imported shoes, phones, or car parts, someone has to pay it. Companies try to pass that cost along, and before long, households are footing the bill. Researchers estimate this hidden tax is costing the average American family roughly $2,400 a year. Money that can't be spent on savings, school supplies, or a holiday gift. Think about a single shopping trip. The produce aisle costs a few dollars more. Your favorite shirt could be a third more expensive. Shoes and bags might be nearly 40% higher than they were. And on big-ticket items like cars, a 10 to 15% increase can add thousands, sometimes as much as $6,000, to what a family must pay. Those numbers don't feel like policy, they feel like real life. Picture this. A mom standing at the checkout, scanning items and watching the total climb. She tightens her list, leaves a few things behind, and walks out with less than she planned. That tiny decision, skipping a dinner item or delaying a purchase, is how tariffs ripple from a trade policy into daily choices. So in the next section, I'll step back for a moment and show the timeline. What changed, when it happened, and why businesses suddenly started racing to move goods before a deadline. That timeline really explains why the pressure you're seeing at the register is also showing up on docks, in warehouses, and even in local factories. Back in May, Washington and Beijing agreed to a temporary truce. On paper, it looked pretty simple. Both sides would pause new tariff hikes for 90 days. The pause officially kicked in on August 11th and is set to end November 10th. Now, that date might sound far away, but for businesses, it's basically a ticking clock. Every single day on that countdown changes how companies buy, ship, and stock their goods. Here's the reality. Without that pause, tariffs were set to climb to shocking levels, some as high as 145% on certain products. For now, most Chinese imports into the United States carry about a 30% tariff, while United States exports going the other way face a 10% hit. Even at those levels, the costs really sting, but they're nowhere near the extreme hikes that were on the table. That's why the pause matters. It gave businesses a window to breathe, plan, and make moves before the next possible wave of tariffs. Think of it like this. If you know a toll road is about to raise its fee fivefold in 3 months, drivers will rush through now to save money. Importers are doing the same thing. They're front-loading orders, rushing shipments, and trying to beat the November deadline. But that scramble is more than a paperwork shuffle. It sets off a chain reaction. Ports start backing up, freight companies jack up their rates, and storage space becomes scarce. All of it feeds back into the same place: higher costs and more instability for families and businesses. And this is where the story really starts to accelerate. Because the moment companies felt that countdown, the supply chain went into overdrive. Next, I'll walk you through what that rush looks like on the ground: canceled orders suddenly being rebooked, ports jammed with unexpected traffic, and small businesses caught in the middle. The countdown set off a scramble. Importers that had frozen or canceled orders when tariffs looked set to spike are suddenly rushing to bring them back. It's kind of like when a storm is predicted and everyone runs to the store at once. Shelves empty, lines stretch out the door, and chaos builds. Except here, the shelves are warehouses, the lines are cargo ships, and the storm is tariffs snapping back into place. Take something as simple as 9 containers of board games sitting in a Chinese warehouse. Just weeks ago, those shipments weren't worth the risk if tariffs were going to double. Now, with the pause in effect, they've become urgent cargo. Companies are paying extra just to make sure those containers sail before November. Multiply that example by thousands of products, from electronics to holiday decorations, and well, you get the picture of what's happening at America's ports. Los Angeles, Long Beach, Boston. All are seeing a surge of incoming goods. Ocean carriers are rerouting vessels, cramming schedules, and raising freight costs. The result? Congested docks, higher shipping fees, and less space for new shipments. For big retailers, it's frustrating but manageable. They can spread the costs across millions of sales. For small businesses, though, this is brutal. If they stock up too much, they pay crushing storage fees. If they stock up too little, shelves sit empty once tariffs return. Either way, the risk is enough to sink a shop that runs on thin margins. And here's the bigger issue. When supply chains buckle under pressure, those costs don't stay at the docks. They trickle down into everyday life. A delayed shipment here, a freight hike there. It all adds up until families feel it in higher prices and fewer options on store shelves. In the next section, we'll zoom in on that point, how these hidden costs move from warehouses and ports directly into household budgets, and why tariffs are effectively acting like a tax on every family. Here's the part that honestly hits home hardest. Tariffs are basically a tax you don't see until you swipe your card. Companies pay them at the border, but they don't eat that cost. Instead, they pass it along to us, in grocery aisles, clothing racks, and car dealerships. Right now, the average effective tariff rate in the United States sits near 22%, the highest level since the 1930s. That might sound kind of abstract, but in practice, it drains about $2,400 a year from the average family budget. That's money that could have gone toward rent, a vacation, or simply catching up on bills. Let's break it down with real numbers. Clothes? They're roughly 1/3 more expensive. Shoes and bags? Close to 40% higher. Cars? Sticker prices are inflated by about 12%, which can add as much as $6,000 to a new vehicle. And even groceries aren't safe. Produce is up about 7%, and fruits and vegetables now cost 3 to 4% more than they did before tariffs. So, picture a parent walking through the checkout line. The total flashes higher than expected, and suddenly, tough choices have to be made. Do they put back a few items? Or maybe do they delay replacing those worn-out shoes? If you multiply those moments across millions of households, you really start to see how trade policy morphs into everyday stress. And here's the kicker: independent analysis from Goldman Sachs shows that about 86% of the costs are being carried not by Chinese exporters, but by American families and small businesses. In other words, the people tariffs were supposed to protect are actually the ones paying the bill. But, families aren't the only ones feeling the pinch. Businesses are reshaping their hiring, cutting back on hours, and in some cases, shutting down altogether. In the next section, we'll look at jobs, especially manufacturing, and how the fallout from tariffs is showing up in paychecks and entire local economies. On paper, the economy still looks steady. The stock market is holding, and GDP is growing at around 3.3%. But if you zoom into the job market, especially in manufacturing towns, the cracks are obvious. August's jobs report showed only 22,000 new jobs added nationwide, far below the 75,000 that were expected. In June, revisions even revealed an outright loss of 13,000 jobs, the first decline since 2020. Manufacturing has taken the hardest hit, 12,000 jobs lost just in August and 78,000 compared to a year earlier. Those aren't just numbers. They represent families, towns, and small businesses that depend on steady wages. Picture a car dealership. With sticker prices thousands of dollars higher than last year, buyers hesitate, deals fall through, and salespeople earn less commission. Or think of a farmer already working with razor-thin margins, now paying more for imported equipment, seeds, and fertilizer. The costs don't vanish. They resurface as fewer hires, smaller paychecks, and shuttered plants. The Center for American Progress highlighted just how broad the downturn has become. Manufacturing employment is down by 42,000, job openings have dropped by 76,000, and hiring shrank by 18,000. Wages are barely moving, creeping up just 10 cents an hour. In communities that rely on factories, one plant closing doesn't just mean lost jobs. It means fewer customers for diners, less tax revenue for schools, and hospitals under greater strain. This is why tariffs cut deeper than a headline about trade wars. They ripple through entire ecosystems of workers, families, and local businesses. And while leaders in Washington point to national growth numbers, those stats don't capture what's happening in towns where plants are going dark. But even Washington can't ignore all the strain. That's why, behind the scenes, the administration has been forced to quietly adjust, handing out exemptions, pausing hikes, and in some cases, unwinding parts of the tariff plan. In the next section, we'll look at these political backtracks and what they reveal about how unstable the policy has become. When tariffs first rolled out, the message from Washington was firm. Tough trade measures would bring manufacturing back and put pressure on Beijing. But fast forward a few months, and the reality is far messier. Behind closed doors, the same leaders who promised no compromises are quietly making exceptions, backpedaling, and even suspending parts of the plan. Take the auto industry, for example. Tariffs on imported electric vehicle batteries were supposed to hold firm, but once U.S. automakers pushed back, warning of skyrocketing costs and delayed production, exemptions slipped in. The same happened with medical supplies, originally caught in the tariff net, then quietly removed once hospitals and health groups raised alarms. It's a pattern. Announce tough measures, then carve out loopholes when the backlash gets too sharp. These exemptions aren't small. They affect billions of dollars in goods. And every carve-out signals to businesses that the policy isn't stable. It could shift tomorrow, depending on which lobby pushes hardest. Think of it like building a dam with cracks in the concrete. On the outside, it looks strong and unyielding. But as water seeps through, patch after patch is added. Soon, the dam looks less like a structure of strength and more like a series of desperate fixes. For companies making long-term decisions, whether to build a new factory, expand exports, or hire more workers, that kind of instability is poison. They can't plan around a policy that changes with every press release or lobbying effort. And this growing inconsistency brings us to the next chapter, the political costs. Because when voters see promises broken and costs rising, it's not just businesses that feel the strain, it's the politicians themselves. In the next section, we'll dive into how the tariff war is reshaping the political battlefield. Politically, tariffs were sold as a win-win strong on China, protective of American jobs, and a show of leadership. But, the reality playing out in living rooms and factories across the country tells a different story. And voters are definitely noticing. Surveys show a sharp divide. In rural areas, many farmers initially backed the tariff strategy, hoping it would level the playing field. But when soybean exports dropped and storage silos overflowed, patience wore thin. In manufacturing towns, the promise of bringing jobs back hasn't matched the factory closures and layoffs people see firsthand. That shift in mood is showing up in approval ratings. Independent voters, who often swing elections, are increasingly skeptical. Many just don't buy the argument that short-term pain will lead to long-term gain. And when workers lose jobs or pay more at the store, they don't blame distant trade negotiators in Beijing. They blame Washington. Even within Congress, cracks are widening. Lawmakers from states hit hardest by tariffs, like Iowa for farming and Michigan for auto manufacturing, are pressing the administration for relief. Bipartisan coalitions are forming not out of ideology, but out of necessity. When local businesses start closing, party lines matter less than survival. Here's the political danger. Tariffs were supposed to be a show of strength. Instead, they're becoming a liability, especially as elections creep closer. For some politicians, doubling down could mean alienating key voting blocs. For others, backtracking risks looking weak. It's a no-win bind. And as Washington weighs its next move, businesses and families are left in limbo, waiting for clarity. Which raises the final question, where does this all lead? In the last section, we'll connect the dots and look at the possible outcomes, from escalation into a deeper trade war to a fragile truce or even a full policy reversal. So where does this all lead? The answer really depends on how long Washington and Beijing can keep walking this tightrope. There are three possible paths ahead, and each comes with huge consequences. First, escalation. If the 90-day pause expires without progress, tariffs could jump back onto the table, not just at today's 30%, but potentially surging past 100% on certain goods. That would send shockwaves through the global economy. Prices in American stores would climb even higher. Chinese exports would slow, and both countries would risk sliding toward recession. Second, a fragile truce. This would mean extending the pause, adding more exemptions, and quietly de-escalating without calling it surrender. Politically, it allows both sides to save face. Leaders can say they stood firm while businesses get relief. But make no mistake, a truce isn't peace. It would leave companies stuck in uncertainty, never knowing if next month's order will be slapped with new costs. Finally, reversal. History shows that even the toughest trade wars often end in retreat. In the 1980s, the United States tried a similar tariff-heavy approach against Japan. After years of back and forth, most of the measures were rolled back, replaced with negotiated agreements. A full reversal today would mean scrapping tariffs, reopening supply chains, and admitting the strategy backfired. That outcome might stabilize markets, but politically, it would be the hardest to sell. For now, families keep paying more, Businesses keep scrambling, and workers in key industries wonder what's next. The decisions in the next few months will shape not just trade flows, but the everyday economy. What we pay at the store, what jobs are available, and how secure our paychecks feel. And that's why this story matters. Because tariffs aren't just numbers in a news headline. They're dollars out of your pocket, stability out of your community, and trust out of your politics. What happens next will determine whether this experiment in economic pressure becomes a turning point or just another costly mistake.